He runs Seoul's most feared criminal empire. Cold, ruthless, untouchable. Every rival who has ever challenged Han Do-jaeum has either disappeared or wished they had. But every Sunday, this man who makes grown soldiers flinch buys groceries with his own hands, walks into a tiny apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and helps a 7-year-old boy with his homework. No bodyguards, no weapons, no mafia, just a child who calls him Mr. Han and a woman who has every reason in the world to destroy him. Because 7 years ago, Do-jaeum's world took everything from Zola Mensa, her brother, her safety, her future, and she doesn't know yet that the man quietly fixing her broken sink is the same man who was there the night it all fell apart. When the truth comes out, it will burn everything. And what rises from those ashes will either save them all or kill what's left. Subscribe, hit the bell, and don't go anywhere. This story will not let you breathe. The resignation letter, if you could call it that, was a single sentence written on plain white paper in Do-jaeum's careful handwriting. He left it on the syndicate's conference table at 3 in the morning when the building was empty, placed it beneath a glass paperweight shaped like a hawk, and walked out without looking back. He did not take anything. Not the watch collection in his office drawer. Not the envelope of emergency cash taped beneath the desk. Not the photograph of the syndicate's founding members that hung on the wall like a family portrait. He left all of it. He walked down 11 flights of stairs because the elevator felt too slow, pushed open the ground floor door, stepped into the cold Seoul air, and breathed for what felt like the first time in 17 years. He had exactly one destination. The apartment was a 20-minute drive from the syndicate headquarters, located on a narrow street in Mapogu where the buildings were old and the streetlights flickered. Do-jaeum had paid the rent on this apartment for 6 years. He had replaced the water heater twice, fixed the front door lock 4 times, repainted the kitchen ceiling after a leak, and personally installed blackout curtains in the bedroom because Jabari had complained that morning light woke him too early. He had done all of this quietly, carefully, always arriving when Zola was at work, always leaving before she returned, for 3 full years before she had come home early that rainy afternoon and found him ruining her ramen. He parked on the street, turned off the engine, and sat for a long moment looking up at the window on the 3rd floor where the light was still on. It was past midnight. Jabari would be asleep. Zola would either be awake because she was working a late cleaning shift at the office building 2 blocks away and had not yet returned, or she would be awake because she was the kind of woman who did not sleep well when the world was uncertain, and lately the world had been very uncertain. He had called her once, from a payphone, 3 days after rescuing Jabari from the rival compound. He had not spoken when she answered. He had just listened to her breathe and then hung up. He was not proud of that, but he had not known what words existed for what he needed to say. He got out of the car now and stood on the pavement looking up. The window was open slightly. That meant she was inside. Zola only opened windows when she was home because she did not trust the neighborhood enough to leave them open when she left. He pressed the intercom button. There was a long silence. Then her voice, flat and cautious. "Who is it?" "It's me." Another silence, longer than the first. Then the buzz of the door unlocking. He climbed the stairs slowly. Not because he was tired. Because each step felt like it required a decision he was not entirely sure he was qualified to make. On the 2nd floor landing, a neighbor's cat regarded him from atop a cardboard box. Do-jaeum looked back at it. The cat blinked once and looked away, apparently unimpressed. He understood completely. Zola was standing in the open doorway when he reached the 3rd floor. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt and dark trousers, her hair wrapped, arms folded. She had a look on her face that he had come to understand over the past several months meant she was not angry, but was working very hard to determine whether she should be. "It's late," she said. "I know. Jabari is asleep. I know." She studied him for a moment. Her eyes moved across his face the way they always did when she was reading him, pulling apart whatever expression he was wearing to find what was underneath. It was one of the things about her that had undone him completely, that careful, unafraid attention. Most people looked away from him quickly. Zola never did. "You look different," she said. "I left the syndicate tonight." The words sat between them in the hallway air. Zola's arms did not unfold. Her expression did not change dramatically, but something behind her eyes shifted, just slightly, like a door opening a crack. "Come in," she said finally. "I'll make tea." The apartment was warm and smelled faintly of the shea butter Zola used, and the particular slightly dusty smell of Jabari's superhero comic books, which were stacked in 3 leaning towers beside the small sofa. Dujayam stepped inside carefully, as he always did, as if the space deserved respect. He took off his shoes at the door without being asked because he had learned early that this mattered to her. He sat at the kitchen table in the chair that had somehow, over months of Sunday visits and crisis-driven evenings, become understood as his chair, the one facing the window rather than the door. Zola moved around the small kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who had spent years doing things quickly because she never had enough time. She filled the kettle, set it on the stove, pulled 2 cups from the cabinet. "What does leaving mean, exactly?" she said. Not a question. More like a scientist establishing parameters. "It means I walked out. Tonight. I left a note. I'm not going back." Just like that. It's not just like anything. It took a long time. But yes, tonight was the night. She was quiet while the kettle heated. Dujayam watched her back, the set of her shoulders, the way she moved. He thought about the first time he had seen her, 25 years old, screaming in a Itaewon alley over her brother's body. The sound of it something he had never been able to fully bury no matter how many other memories he piled on top. He thought about the 7 years of watching from a distance, the anonymous payments, the careful invisible maintenance of her safety. He thought about Jabari at 7 years old asking him with complete sincerity why his hands were always hurt, and not having an answer that was fit for a child's ears. He thought about 4 weeks ago, Jabari's small body in his arms after the rescue. The boy crying against his neck saying you came back, and Dujayam standing in a destroyed warehouse surrounded by men he had put on the ground, completely unable to speak because something in his chest had cracked open that he did not know how to close. "They'll come after you," Zola said. She set a cup of tea in front of him and sat down across the table with her own. "The syndicate. You don't just leave organizations like that. I know what happens. I've handled it." "Handled it how?" "The leadership is compromised. I spent the last 3 weeks making sure every piece of leverage I had was either public or in the hands of people who will use it if I'm touched. The new structure doesn't benefit from my death. It benefits from my absence. They'll be angry. But anger without power is just noise." Zola wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at him steadily. "You planned this while everything else was happening. After Jabari was taken, I couldn't pretend anymore that I could keep both worlds. The syndicate became a liability to him the moment they realized he mattered to me. I should have seen it sooner." He paused. "I should have done this years ago." "Yes," she said simply. "You should have." He did not argue with that. It was true. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the street outside, and somewhere in the building someone's television playing something with dramatic music. Zola looked down at her tea. Dujayam watched her profile, the firm line of her jaw, the slight tension around her mouth that meant she was thinking carefully before speaking. "What do you want, Dujayam?" she said finally. "Tonight. What are you here for?" It was the most direct question anyone had ever asked him, and somehow also the most difficult one he had ever been required to answer. He had walked into rival gang operations with less anxiety than he felt right now sitting in this kitchen. "I want to be here," he said. "I want to stop disappearing and appearing. I want to stop being the man who exists only in pieces around the edges of your life. I want to be." He stopped. Started again. "I want to try. Whatever that looks like. Whatever you'll allow. Even if it's slow. Even if it takes a long time. I want to try." Zola was quiet for a long moment. "You killed my brother," she said. The words were measured, deliberately not explosive. She said them the way someone states a fact they have long since accepted and integrated into their understanding of the world. "Not with your hands. But you were there. You were part of it. Yes. You've been paying for it in secret for 6 years. Yes. You think that clears the debt?" "No," he said, immediately and without hesitation. "Nothing clears that. I'm not here asking you to forgive me. I'm not sure forgiveness is something I have the right to ask for. I'm here because I love your son. And because..." He stopped again. His voice, which had given orders in rooms full of dangerous men without wavering, was doing something unsteady and inconvenient. "Because when I walk out of here on Sundays, I feel like I'm leaving the only real thing I've ever had. And I'm tired of doing that." Zola looked at him for a very long time. "Drink your tea," she said finally. "It's getting cold." He did. The tea was ginger and something else he didn't know the name of, a Ghanaian blend she made from a tin she kept at the back of the cabinet. It was the same thing she had made him the first time she had reluctantly allowed him to stay for dinner, 3 months after the initial rainy afternoon encounter. After Jabari had cried for 40 minutes straight every time Dujayam left, and Zola had apparently decided that her son's emotional well-being required a tactical compromise. Dujayam had memorized the taste of this tea the way soldiers memorize the sounds of different weapons. Automatic. Involuntary. Something his body had decided mattered before his mind had fully acknowledged it. "I'm not forgiving you tonight," she said. "I understand. I might not forgive you for a long time. I know. And I'm not." She paused, pressing her lips together briefly. "I'm not making any decisions tonight about what this is or what it becomes. I've made too many important decisions while I was still in the middle of feeling things. I'm not doing that again. Okay. But," she looked at him directly, "you can come back tomorrow. You can take Jabari to school. He's been asking every morning for 3 weeks if you're coming, and I've been running out of ways to answer him." Something happened in Dujayam's chest that he did not have adequate vocabulary for. He set his teacup down carefully so that his hands would have something to do. "What time does school start?" he said. 8. "So you need to be here by 7:15 because he takes 45 minutes to eat breakfast and argues about every single piece of clothing." "I'll be here at 7. Zola almost smiled. It was not a full smile. It was the very beginning of one, the slight softening at the corner of her mouth that he had cataloged and memorized the way other men cataloged things of obvious value. She stood up and took her cup to the sink. "The couch folds out," she said, with her back to him. "There are extra blankets in the storage box under the window. Try to be quiet because the floor creaks near Jabari's door, and if he hears you, he will not sleep." Dujayam sat very still for a moment. "You're telling me I can stay?" "I'm telling you where the blankets are," she said. "Don't make it more than it is. Good night, Dujayam." She walked to her room and closed the door. Not slammed. Closed, with the particular measured quietness of a woman who was choosing her actions deliberately. Dujayam sat at the table for another few minutes. Through the window he could see the narrow street below, empty now, a single streetlight making a small orange circle on the wet pavement. No syndicate cars. No tail. No one watching. For the first time in 17 years, he was not being watched, followed, or listened to. For the first time in 17 years, the silence around him was simply silence. He found the blankets. He unfolded the couch. He lay down in the dark apartment that smelled like shea butter and Jabari's comic books and ginger tea and thought about how improbable it was that this was real, that he was here, that this was where the night had ended. He was asleep within minutes, which was remarkable because he had not slept without nightmares in over a decade. He did not dream about blood that night. In the morning, Jabari found him. Dujayam heard the small feet on the creaking floor and was awake before the boy appeared, a professional reflex that no amount of domesticity would ever fully override. Jabari stood in the dimness of the early morning in his pajamas with the faded superhero print, hair flattened on one side from sleep, staring at Dujayam on the couch with an expression of pure and total wonder, as if he had found exactly what he had written on a birthday wish list and hadn't entirely believed he would actually receive. "You slept here," Jabari whispered. "I slept here. Are you staying?" Dujayam sat up slowly. Jabari was 7 years old and small for his age and had his mother's careful watching eyes and his uncle's mouth, a genetic legacy that Dujayam was aware of with a specific weight he carried always. The boy had Zola's quality of attention, that directness, that refusal to pretend a question hadn't been asked. "I'm going to take you to school this morning," Dujayam said. "And then we'll see." "We'll see means maybe," Jabari said, with the weary expertise of a child who had long since decoded adult hedging. "It means yes this morning, and we figure out the rest together." Jabari considered this with apparent seriousness. Then he climbed up onto the couch beside Dujayam, tucked himself under the edge of the blanket, and leaned against his arm with the comfortable ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times, though in truth they had only sat like this a handful of times, on Sunday afternoons when Jabari fell asleep during animated films and woke up confused and then immediately comfortable. "I told Son at school that you were like a superhero," Jabari said, in his matter-of-fact way. "He said superheroes aren't real, and his dad said people like you are dangerous." "Son's father is right that people like me can be dangerous," Dujayam said carefully. "But you never hurt me." "No." "Or Mama." "No." Jabari was quiet for a moment. "The bad men who took me," he said, and Dujayam's entire body went very still. "They were scared of you. When you came in they were so scared. I saw it." He paused. "I wasn't scared when I saw you." Dujayam looked down at the top of the boy's head. His hands, which had done things in the past 3 weeks that he would have to spend a long time accounting for, were resting on his knees. He was aware of the contradiction of sitting here, in this quiet apartment, in this particular early morning light, with this child against his arms speaking plainly about fear and safety. "Were you scared when they took you?" Dujayam asked. "A little," Jabari said. He said it without drama, the way children sometimes reported difficult things, cleanly, and without editorializing. "But I kept thinking you would come. I knew you would come." Dujayam said nothing for a long moment. "I will always come," he said. It was the most definitive promise he had made in 17 years of keeping promises with bullets and money and threats. It felt more binding than all of them. Jabari nodded as if this confirmed something he had already known and stood up briskly. "I need to eat. Mama says I take too long, but she makes too much food, and it's not polite to not finish." "That's a reasonable position," Dujayam said. "Do you want eggs?" "I can do eggs. I've been learning." "Show me." Jabari's eggs were ambitious and structurally complex, and only technically qualified as eggs in the way that a demolished building technically still contains the same materials as the original structure. Dujayam watched him work with complete gravity, offering no commentary unless directly asked, which was the same approach he had taken to every task Jabari had ever attempted in his presence, from science projects to attempts at learning to tie shoelaces to the time the boy had decided to build a fort out of sofa cushions that required 3 separate load-bearing supports. Zola appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed for her morning shift, and found Jabari presenting a plate of scrambled eggs with the solemnity of a chef at a Michelin-starred restaurant, and Dujayam examining them with equal seriousness. She stopped. Something moved across her face, quick and unguarded, there and gone before she shuttered it. She had a remarkable ability to return her expression to neutral that Dujayam recognized as the same reflex he had trained in himself for years, the survival instinct of someone who had learned that showing feeling was a vulnerability. He hated seeing it in her. He hated that she had needed to build it. "You're here early," she said, directing this at Dujayam. 7 o'clock, he said. "You said 7. "It is 7, Jabari confirmed without looking up. "I checked the clock. Mr. Han is on time. He's always on time." "Don't call me that," Dujayam said. Jabari looked up. "What should I call you?" The question landed in the kitchen air. Zola was looking at Dujayam with an expression that was carefully unreadable, but had around the edges of it something that was either daring him or warning him, or possibly both simultaneously. Dujayam looked at Jabari. "What would you like to call me?" he said. Jabari considered this with the profound thoughtfulness he applied to all important decisions. "Can I think about it?" he said. "Yes." "Okay." He returned to his eggs. "For now I'll call you Dujayam because Mama does." "That works," Dujayam said. Zola poured herself coffee and said nothing, but she did not argue, and in the economy of her expressions, the absence of argument from Zola Mensa was the loudest possible form of permission. The weeks that followed were not simple. Dujayam had not expected simple. He had dealt in the currency of difficult things for long enough to know that nothing worth having was simple, and that the instinct to want ease was the thing that made most men weak. What he had not fully prepared for was the specific texture of difficulty that came with trying to be a decent person in the life of someone who had been given excellent reasons not to trust decent people. Zola allowed him to take Jabari to school. She allowed him to be present for homework, for dinner on certain evenings, for the school play in which Jabari performed a speaking role as a historical figure and delivered every line with the confidence of someone who had been told repeatedly that he was exceptional and had simply chosen to believe it. Dujayam sat in the audience in a plain dark jacket, having left his usual coat in the car because it looked too expensive and he did not want to stand out, and watched Jabari on the small school stage, and felt something so enormous and specific that he had no category for it, had never needed a category for it before, because nothing in 17 years of syndicate work had required him to have a word for sitting in a school gymnasium watching a child you loved be brave in public. He was aware of other parents looking at him. He was impossible to ignore in most rooms, a fact he had long since accepted as a feature of his physical presence and general history. A Korean man alone at a Ghanaian child's school play was enough to draw attention regardless of anything else about him. One woman leaned toward her husband and said something. The husband glanced at Do Jayam and then found something very interesting to look at on the other side of the room. Do Jayam did not react. He watched Jabari finish his lines and take a bow and search the audience with his eyes until he found Do Jayam, at which point he broke into a grin so wide it was almost architectural. Do Jayam raised his hand once, a small gesture. Jabari's grin got wider. Zola arrived late. Slipping into the seat Do Jayam had saved beside him without acknowledging that he had saved it. She was still in her kitchen work clothes. She smelled like cooking and cold air, and something underneath that was just Zola. She watched her son on the stage, and her face did the thing it did sometimes when she thought no one was looking. Went soft and unguarded and full of something so fierce and tender it was almost painful to witness. Do Jayam looked at the stage. After a moment she said, quietly, "You saved me a seat." The auditorium was filling up. She was quiet. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time she had thanked him for anything. Not for the years of anonymous payments, which she had long since pieced together but not acknowledged directly. Not for the rescue. Not for any of the Sunday visits, or the repaired appliances, or the homework sessions. This. A saved seat. She thanked him for this, which meant she was choosing to be in a world where this was what she acknowledged because it was small enough to accept without conceding anything she wasn't ready to concede. He understood that. He accepted it completely. The trouble came from outside, as trouble always did. 6 weeks after he left the syndicate, 2 men from the organization's new leadership came to find him. They arrived at the apartment building at 8 in the morning, which was a pointed choice of time designed to communicate that they knew his schedule, knew his patterns, and were not afraid to demonstrate it. Do Jayam saw them from the window as he was leaving to take Jabari to school, and he processed several things simultaneously. The car they were in, the way the taller one stood with his weight slightly forward, which meant he was not there to negotiate, and the fact that Jabari was standing at his elbow saying something about a permission slip and could not be allowed to see what happened next. "Go back inside," Do Jayam told him. "Tell your mother I forgot something, and I'll be up in a minute." "You never forget things," Jabari said. "Today I did. Go." Jabari looked at him with those careful eyes. He looked at the street. He looked back at Do Jayam. He was 7 years old and had been taken by men in a van 4 weeks ago and rebuilt his trust and safe return specifically and painstakingly. Do Jayam watched the calculation move across his small face and hated the men on the street with a cold, specific intensity for being the reason a child had to calculate. "Okay," Jabari said. "I'll tell Mama." He went inside. Do Jayam walked out to the street. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. He knew because he counted. The 2 men said what they came to say, which amounted to a suggestion that his departure had created problems and that those problems could be resolved if he returned in a consultative capacity on certain sensitive matters. Do Jayam listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he explained, in the particular quiet tone he had always used when he wanted someone to understand that what he was saying was not a negotiating position but a conclusion, exactly what would happen if anyone connected to the syndicate came to this address again, spoke to anyone who lived here, or in any way inserted the organization's business into the life of this household. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch either man. He simply explained. They left. He stood on the street for a moment after their car turned the corner, looking up at the apartment window. The curtain moved slightly. Zola. He had not been careful enough about the curtain. He went back inside. She was in the kitchen doorway when he came back up the stairs, Jabari hovering behind her with his backpack on. "They'll keep coming," she said. Not panicked. Assessing. The same tone she used for practical problems. "Less than you think. The structure of what I put in place makes it more valuable for them to leave me alone than to escalate. But not impossible. Nothing is impossible. But I've handled this." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not afraid," she said. "That's not who I am. I know. And I'm not going to pretend I can protect Jabari the way you can. That's also not who I am. I know. So tell me honestly, is he safe?" "He is safer with me here than anywhere else." That is not a comfortable thing to say, and it is not the answer I wish I could give you, but it is true. Zola looked at him. She looked at Jabari. She looked at Do Jayam again. "Then we deal with it," she said. "Jabari, say goodbye, and let's go." "But Do Jayam always takes me." Today I'm taking you. Dujayam has things to handle. Mama, Jabari. The single word, that particular frequency of maternal finality, silenced even Jabari's considerable persistence. He turned to Dujayam with an expression of profound injustice. Will you be here when I come home? Yes, Dujayam said. Promise. Yes. Jabari nodded once with great gravity, the nod of someone who has extracted a binding contract, and followed his mother out. Dujayam stood in the quiet apartment for a moment. Then he took out his phone and made the calls that needed to be made. The months that followed were a careful negotiation, not between Dujayam and Zola, but between the version of himself he had been for 17 years and the version he was trying to build. It was not like learning new things. It was more like excavating something that had existed before, some earlier version of himself that the syndicate years had buried under layers of necessity and calculation. He found it in pieces. In the way he helped Jabari with his reading homework with a patience that surprised him. In the way he learned to stop watching every door in a room with tactical assessment, and instead sometimes just sit with his back to the wall and his eyes closed and listen to the kitchen sounds of Zola cooking. In the way he started sleeping through the night more nights than not. He was not perfect. He was constitutionally incapable of ignoring potential threats, which meant that the first time a man on the street outside the apartment lingered for too long, he had the man's identity and history within 40 minutes and had dispatched the situation before Zola was aware there had been a situation. She found out, because she always found out, and she called him into the kitchen and shut the door so Jabari wouldn't hear, and told him that if he was going to be in their lives he needed to tell her things instead of managing them silently, because she had not survived this long by being protected from information. She had survived by having it. You're right, he said. I know I am. Don't look surprised. I'm not surprised. He paused. I'm used to protecting people by removing threats before they become visible. It's what I know. I'm not your soldier, she said. I'm not someone you manage. If something is happening that affects my son, I need to know. Our son, he said. It came out before the calculation could stop it. He heard what he had said. He held very still. Zola looked at him. The silence was very full. That is a large thing to say, she said. I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize for it, she said quietly. Just don't say it again until I'm ready to hear it. Okay. She turned back to the counter. After a moment she said, without looking at him, he asked me last week if you were his appa. Dujayam said nothing. I told him that was a word for people who had always been there. That you were something different. Something we were still finding the word for. She paused. He told me that sometimes people are things before there are words for them. He's right, Dujayam said. He's 7, Zola said. It's remarkable how often 7-year-olds are right. She handed him a chopping board and a pile of vegetables. He took them. They cooked dinner together in the small kitchen in a silence that was nothing like the silences Dujayam had spent 17 years inhabiting. Those silences were tactical. This one was the kind that meant two people occupying the same space had decided, without negotiating it out loud, that they were comfortable. He was aware, standing in this kitchen chopping vegetables, that this was the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him. The conversation they needed to have came on a Sunday evening in late autumn, 8 months after he had left the syndicate. Jabari was asleep. Dujayam had fixed the loose cabinet hinge that had been bothering Zola for weeks, and then sat at the kitchen table while she went through her finances for the restaurant she was beginning to plan, a dream she had mentioned only once before in his presence, as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. He had not mentioned her saying it. He had spent the following 2 weeks putting together a completely unsolicited document about small business licensing in Seoul, commercial kitchen requirements, neighborhood demographics, and foot traffic patterns near 3 specific locations he identified as viable. He put it in an envelope and left it on the table one Sunday, without explanation. She had not mentioned it for 3 weeks. Tonight, she slid it across the table to him, with her own notations written in the margins in her precise handwriting. Neighborhood B, she said, pointing at his analysis. I thought C had better foot traffic, he said. B has better rent, and the neighborhood is changing. In 2 years, foot traffic will be comparable, and the overhead will be lower. He looked at her notations. They were correct. Neighborhood B, he agreed. She looked at him across the table. The apartment was quiet, and the night was quiet, and they were alone in the particular way that adults are alone when a child is asleep nearby. which is different from all other kinds of alone. I need to say something, she said. I've been trying to find the right time, but I think the right time is now. Okay. When you first told me the truth. About the syndicate. About my brother. She stopped. The words were controlled, but he could see what they cost her. I wanted you gone. Not just out of my home. Gone. I wanted you not to exist. I know. I still have days when I feel that. She held his gaze. I want you to know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I don't expect you to pretend anything. But, she said. She pressed her hands flat on the table, a steadying gesture. I've been watching you for 8 months. I've been watching you choose us every single day, even when it was difficult, and even when I made it difficult. I've been watching you with Jabari. Her voice went quieter. My brother was the last person who looked at my son the way you do. Like he was the most valuable thing in any room. Dujayam was very still. I am never going to stop grieving him, she said. And I am never going to stop wishing things had been different. But I am also not going to spend the rest of my life refusing to accept something real, because the path here was wrong. She looked at him steadily. I'm not forgiving the syndicate. I'm not forgiving the system. I'm not even saying I've fully forgiven you, because I think forgiveness is something that happens slowly, and I'm still in the middle of it. But I am saying, she paused, I am saying that I see you, the man you are now, and I am choosing to let that matter. Dujayam looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the alley in Itaewon 7 years ago, and the way the night had been cold and smelled like rain. He thought about a young woman's grief and a small boy's confusion and the particular weight of a guilt he had carried so long it had become structural, part of the architecture of who he was. He thought about 17 years of believing that he did not deserve anything ordinary, anything warm, anything that required him to be a person rather than a function. I need to tell you something, he said. She waited. For most of my adult life, I operated under the conviction that I had forfeited the right to anything good, that the things I had done made me ineligible. And I think part of why I stayed in the syndicate as long as I did is because staying felt like the appropriate punishment. Like belonging to something violent was what I deserved. That's not redemption, Zola said quietly. That's just a different kind of self-destruction. I know that now. He looked at his hands on the table. Jabari asked me once why I don't smile. I told him I wasn't sure how. That wasn't entirely a metaphor. He looked up. He said he would teach me. He's been practicing on me for 2 years. Something in Zola's expression shifted, opened slightly. He has, she said. I've noticed. He's getting somewhere, Dujayam said. Zola looked at him for a moment, and then, slowly, fully, she smiled. Not the controlled corner of the mouth thing she allowed herself sometimes. Actually smiled, the full version, the one that changed her whole face. And it was so sudden and so genuine that it moved through Dujayam's chest like the resolution of something that had been unresolved for a very long time. Don't look so shocked, she said. It's just a smile. It's not just anything, he said. She laughed. A small sound, involuntary, immediately suppressed, but real. She pressed her fingers to her mouth as if to catch it. Go to sleep, she said, standing up. You have to take Jabari to his football match at 8 tomorrow. I know. He's going to want a specific breakfast. Eggs without the structural complications. I don't know what that means. Eggs that look like eggs when they're finished. She looked at him with something in her eyes that was warm and tired and full of the particular complicated feeling of a person who has survived enough hard things to know exactly how rare a moment of genuine ease is. Good night, Dujayam, she said. Good night. She went to her room. He sat at the kitchen table for a moment longer in the quiet apartment on the narrow street in Mapogu, looking at her notes in the margins of his document. Neighborhood B in her handwriting, the plan for a future taking shape in someone's careful, deliberate hand. Then he folded the blanket at the end of the couch, turned off the kitchen light, and lay in the dark thinking about nothing violent, nothing tactical, nothing that required a decision or a strategy. Just the weight of the building around him, the sound of the street, the faint creak of Jabari turning in his sleep, the thin line of light under Zola's door that told him she was reading before she slept, as she always did. He was not a religious man. He had not been in a position to afford religion for 17 years. But lying in the dark that night he thought, with something he did not have a better word for than gratitude, that he had not known it was possible to feel safe from the inside. He had spent 17 years making other people afraid so that he could feel safe. He had not understood, until a 7-year-old boy with his mother's careful eyes asked him why nobody had hugged him when he was little, that safety was not something you could build from the outside in. The football match the next morning went well, except for the moment when Jabari scored a goal and turned to the sideline and shouted Do Jiam's name first before his mother's, then looked immediately horrified by this and shouted Mama with overcorrected volume. And Zola, standing beside Do Jiam on the touchline, put her hands over her mouth and made a sound that was very close to laughing. Do Jiam's hand was close enough to hers that he could have moved his finger half an inch, and they would have been touching. He did not move his finger. He waited. After a moment, Zola moved her hand, and her fingers found his, and she held on with the quiet grip of a woman who had decided something. Do Jiam watched Jabari run back into position on the field, arms out like a plane, completely uninhibited joy, and felt the specific warmth of Zola's hand and the cold autumn air and the ordinary noise of parents on the sideline, and thought, this is what I stayed alive for without knowing it. On the field, Jabari looked back at them once. At Do Jiam holding his mother's hand. His face did the thing where the calculation and the joy happened simultaneously. The Zola face. The face of a person processing something important. Then he grinned, the enormous architectural grin, and turned back to the game. If you've stayed until the end of this story, you already know what it does to you. Leave a comment telling us which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances today. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next, because the next story is already waiting. And it starts the same way all real things do, with a choice that changes everything.